The waitress said, "Sir, my mother has a ring exactly like yours." The billionaire CEO was stunned when he heard that. Why would a waitress notice a ring on a billionaire CEO's hand? And what could make him so stunned by the simple statement that her mother owned one exactly like it? Welcome, everyone, to another unforgettable story. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss our next emotional story. Thank you for being here, for watching, and for supporting our channel. Now tell us in the comments, what would you think if someone told you their mother had a ring exactly like yours? Keep that thought in mind, because sometimes a simple sentence can open the door to a much bigger story. And now, let's step into the moment when those unexpected words changed the atmosphere completely. The diamond ring flashed beneath the chandelier, and Nia Brooks nearly dropped a tray worth more than her monthly rent. She caught it with both hands just before the crystal glasses tipped over. The private dining room went silent. 42 floors above Manhattan, rain streaked the windows while four executives stared at the waitress standing beside their table. But Nia wasn't looking at the man. She was looking at the ring on Graham Hale's finger. The billionaire CEO slowly raised his hand, and the oval diamond caught the amber light. Same narrow gold band. Same oval stone. Same tiny engraved star hidden beneath the setting. Nia knew that ring. Her mother had worn one exactly like it for 24 years. She should have walked away. She should have remembered the hotel rules and kept her mouth shut. Instead, she looked directly at the richest man in the room and said the sentence that would destroy a 24-year-old lie. "Sir, my mother has a ring exactly like yours." Graham Hale stopped breathing. He didn't laugh. He didn't smile. He didn't even look angry. His fingers closed around the diamond as if he were afraid it might disappear. "What did you say?" Nia swallowed. "My mother has the same ring." One executive gave an uncomfortable laugh. "She's probably mistaken." Graham slowly turned toward him. "Be quiet." The executive immediately stopped. Graham looked back at Nia. "What's your mother's name?" Nia hesitated. "Althea Brooks." The billionaire's face lost every trace of color. His chair scraped backward across the polished floor. "How old is she?" 48. Graham closed his eyes. 48. 24 years ago, Althea Brooks had been 24. 24 years ago, Graham had been 22, in love, broke, ambitious, and certain that the woman he loved would be waiting when he returned from a business trip. She wasn't. At least, that was what he had been told. He had spent the next 2 decades building a billion-dollar company around the wound of losing her. Now a waitress was standing in front of him with his past in her eyes. "Does your mother still have the ring?" Graham asked. "Yes." "What's engraved inside it?" Nia's heart began to pound. "A star. And a date." Graham's voice dropped. "June 14th. Nia stared at him. "How did you know that?" Graham sat down slowly. For the first time that night, the billionaire CEO looked less like the most powerful man in the room and more like a terrified young man who had just realized the past had found him. "Because," he whispered, "I gave her that ring." Nia's tray suddenly felt impossibly heavy. She stared at him. "Then you know my mother?" Graham looked at her, and something in his expression made her stomach tighten. "I knew her." "What happened?" Nia asked. Graham didn't answer. Instead, he looked at her face again. The eyes, the shape of her mouth, the stubborn tilt of her chin. 24 years ago, he had lost a woman. Tonight, he was beginning to understand that he might have lost a daughter too. And before sunrise, Nia Brooks would discover that her entire childhood had been built around a lie so carefully constructed that even the billionaire at the center of it had believed it. The Sterling Grand was famous for serving people who never wanted to be recognized. Celebrities entered through private elevators. CEOs held negotiations behind soundproof doors. Politicians rented entire floors. Nia had worked there for 3 years, long enough to understand the invisible rules. You didn't stare at wealthy guests. You didn't interrupt private conversations. You didn't ask personal questions. And above all, you didn't make yourself memorable. A waitress could make one mistake and lose her job. Nia knew that better than anyone. She was 24, 5 feet 6 inches tall, with deep brown eyes and a quiet confidence that had been built through necessity rather than privilege. She lived with her mother in Queens in a 2-bedroom apartment that had survived too many winters and too many overdue bills. The kitchen radiator rattled whenever the temperature dropped below 40 degrees. The paint near the window had cracked years ago. Their couch had been repaired so many times that Nia joked it had developed its own medical history. But it was home. Althea had raised her there alone. She worked nights at a hospital laundry, washing sheets and towels for 12-hour shifts. Her hands were always dry. Her shoulders always hurt. Yet she rarely complained. There was only one subject she refused to discuss: Nia's father. When Nia was 6, she asked why she didn't have a dad like the other children. Althea told her she had everything she needed. At 13, Nia asked again, "Who gave you that ring?" Her mother had stopped cutting vegetables. She had stared at the ring for several seconds before answering. "Someone I loved a long time ago." "Where is he?" "Far away." "Does he know about me?" Althea had looked at her for so long that Nia wished she had never asked. Then her mother quietly said, "Eat your dinner." Nia never asked again, but she remembered the ring. She remembered how Althea touched it whenever she was worried. She remembered seeing her mother turn it around her finger while staring out the kitchen window. She remembered one night when Althea thought Nia was asleep and whispered, "I wish you could have known him." Nia had pretended not to hear. For 11 years, she carried that sentence without understanding it. Then Graham Hale walked into the Sterling Grand wearing the matching ring. The dinner had been important. Graham was negotiating a merger that could move nearly $2 billion in capital and expand Hale Systems into 3 new markets. He was 46, impeccably dressed, controlled, and famous for never losing his temper. His company had grown from a small software startup into a technology empire. Business magazines called him brilliant. Competitors called him ruthless. Employees called him demanding. Nobody called him sentimental. Graham had spent 24 years making sure of that. He believed emotions created weaknesses. He believed people left. He believed promises were temporary. Numbers were safer. Contracts were safer. Money was safer. Then Nia saw the ring. She had been carrying a dessert tray toward the table when the diamond caught the chandelier light. Her entire body reacted before her mind could explain why. She remembered her mother's hand. The same gold. The same oval diamond. The same tiny star. She stopped. One of Graham's executives noticed. "Everything okay?" Nia nodded. "Yes, sir." "Then keep moving." She should have. Instead, she looked at Graham. "Sir." He glanced up. "Yes." Nia took a breath. "My mother has a ring exactly like yours." The silence that followed felt physical. Graham stared at her. "What's her name?" "Althea Brooks." His chair moved backward. "How old is she?" 48. He closed his eyes. "Does she still live in Queens?" Nia frowned. "How do you know she lives in Queens?" Graham opened his eyes. "You said your mother has the ring. I need to know if it's the same one." "Why?" "Because I gave it to her." Nia stared at him. One executive shifted uncomfortably. "Graham, perhaps we should continue this later." Graham didn't look at him. "Leave." "What?" "All of you. Leave." The executives looked at each other. Nobody argued. Within 2 minutes, the room was empty except for Graham and Nia. Rain tapped against the windows. Graham looked at her. "What does your mother's ring have engraved inside?" Nia hesitated. "A star and a date. June 14th. "Yes." Graham's face tightened. "I knew it." "Knew what?" He looked at her, and the answer seemed to frighten him. "I loved your mother." Nia's breath caught. "You loved her? A long time ago. Then why isn't he in my life?" Graham stared at her. He looked genuinely confused. "What? My father? Why isn't he in my life?" Graham's lips parted. He couldn't speak. Nia watched his face change. The billionaire who had negotiated billion-dollar deals suddenly looked lost. "What's your father's name?" he asked. Nia gave a bitter smile. "That's the problem. I don't know. Graham looked down at his ring. Neither did I. Nia's eyes narrowed. What does that mean? Graham reached for a business card, turned it over, and wrote his private number on the back. Call me when you're with your mother. Why? Because I think I've been looking for the wrong person for 24 years. Nia took the card. Are you saying you're my father? Graham didn't answer. He couldn't, because the question was too large to fit inside one word. At 11:17 that night, Nia unlocked the apartment door. Althea was at the kitchen table folding hospital uniforms. You're late, she said. Nia dropped her bag. Mom, do you know Graham Hale? The uniform slipped from Althea's hands. She didn't move. Where did you hear that name? He was at the hotel. Althea's face went pale. You spoke to him? Yes. What did he say? He saw your ring. Althea instinctively covered it with her hand. He has one exactly like yours. Her mother sat down. Nia had never seen her look so frightened. Who is he? Althea closed her eyes. The man I loved before you were born. Nia's voice dropped. Is he my father? Althea opened her eyes. I don't know. You don't know? I knew who your father was supposed to be. That doesn't make sense. It doesn't. Althea reached for the ring. There are things I should have told you. Then tell me now. Althea took a long breath. His name was Graham Hale. Nia stared at her. You knew? I knew his name. You knew who he was all these years. I knew what I was told. What were you told? Althea looked toward the window. That he didn't want us. Nia felt anger rise. And you believed him? I believed what I was told. Who told you? Althea hesitated. A man from his family. His father? Althea nodded. Victor Hale. Nia's stomach tightened. Why didn't you tell me? Althea looked at her daughter. Because I was afraid. Of what? Of losing you. Althea's voice broke. I had no money. I was 24. I had a newborn baby. And the people who wanted me gone had lawyers, connections, and enough money to make my life very difficult. Nia sat down. What happened after I was born? Althea looked at the ring. Graham had promised to come back. Did he? No. Why? I don't know. Althea swallowed. I waited at the hospital. He didn't come. Did you call him? Every day. Did he answer? No. Nia stared at her mother. So you thought he abandoned us? Yes. And he thought you left him? Althea's eyes filled with tears. That's what I understand now. Nia remembered Graham's face. The panic. The disbelief. The ring. Then somebody lied. Althea nodded. Yes. Across Manhattan, Graham stood alone in his office with the matching ring in his hand. He had kept it for 24 years. He had never worn it after Althea disappeared. He had placed it inside a black velvet box and locked it in a drawer. He opened the box now. The memory returned with painful clarity. Boston. A small jewelry store. Two young people with almost no money. Althea had laughed when he apologized for the rings. I don't need expensive, she had told him. I need real. He had promised her a future. He had promised to return from his business trip on June 14th. He had promised that when he came back, they would find a place together. He left Boston. Then everything went wrong. His father told him Althea had changed her mind. His assistant said her number was disconnected. Letters he sent were returned. When he demanded answers, his father told him, she made her choice. Graham believed him, not because he wanted to, because Victor had spent Graham's entire childhood teaching him that family knew best. Graham had built his company after that. He turned pain into ambition. Every acquisition was another brick in the wall around his heart. Every success proved he didn't need anyone. Now he opened an old drawer. 3 envelopes sat inside. One had never been opened. The handwriting was unmistakable. Althea. Graham tore it open. The letter contained 6 lines. Graham, I waited at the hospital. They told me you were out of the country. I have your daughter. Please come. I don't know what they told you, but I am still here. Althea. Graham read it twice. Then he looked at the date. June 21st. 24 years ago. His breathing became shallow. My daughter. He sat down. His assistant arrived within minutes. Find every record connected to Nia Brooks. What are we looking for? Everything. Graham, it's midnight. Hospital records. Legal records. Phone records. Correspondence. Property records. Everything. Why? Graham looked at the letter. Because my father may have stolen 24 years from me. The first record came at 4:12 in the morning. Althea had delivered a baby girl on June 20th. Father, Graham Hale. Graham stared at the screen. Then another document appeared. The record had been amended 2 days later. Father, unknown. Reason, legal review. Graham whispered. Who requested the change? The answer appeared. Hale Family Council. His hands went cold. Victor had known. The investigation uncovered more. A hospital administrator had received a private legal request. Graham's office number had been removed from the hospital file. Althea's messages had been redirected. A letter she had mailed to Graham had never reached him. Then they found a payment to a private intermediary. Graham looked at the amount. Who is this? His assistant said, Daniel Mercer. Former junior attorney for your father's firm. Where is he? Retired. Connecticut. Graham grabbed his coat. Find his address. At dawn, Graham drove alone to Connecticut. Daniel Mercer was 71 and living in a modest house outside Hartford. When Graham knocked, the old man opened the door and looked at him for several seconds. I knew you'd come. Graham's jaw tightened. You know why I'm here. Daniel nodded. Yes. Did my father pay you to intercept Althea's correspondence? Daniel looked down. Yes. Did you alter the hospital record? I filed the request. Did you tell Althea I had abandoned her? Yes. Graham stared at him. Why? Daniel's voice was barely audible. Your father told me he was protecting the family. You destroyed a family. Daniel closed his eyes. I know. Did you know about the baby? Yes. Graham's face changed. You knew? Your father knew. When? Before the birth. And he told you to keep me away? Daniel nodded. He said you were about to secure your first major investment. He believed Althea would damage your future. Graham laughed once, without humor. She was my future. Daniel looked at him. I know. No, you don't. Graham stepped closer. You don't know what you took. Daniel swallowed. There is something else. Graham stopped. What? Your father had someone monitor Althea for years. Graham stared. What do you mean, monitor? He wanted to know where she lived. Whether she contacted you. Whether your daughter knew your name. Graham's expression hardened. My daughter. Daniel nodded. He knew about Nia. The words hit harder than anything else. Graham stepped backward. He knew she existed? Yes. For 24 years. Yes. Why? Daniel hesitated. Because Victor believed that if you ever discovered the truth, you would stop being the son he wanted and become the man you were before him. Graham stared through the window. For 24 years, he had blamed himself for losing Althea. For 24 years, he had believed he had failed because he wasn't strong enough. Now he understood that his greatest failure had been trusting his father's version of reality. But there was one question left. Where are the monitoring records? Daniel looked frightened. I don't have them. Who does? Your father's old private investigator. Graham's voice went cold. Find him. The investigator was dead. But his daughter, Margaret Reed, had inherited his files. Graham met her 2 days later in a small office in New Jersey. She placed an old cardboard box on the table. My father kept everything. Graham opened it. Photographs, addresses, notes, receipts, surveillance logs. And then he saw a photograph that made his heart stop. Althea walking down a Queen Street with 6-year-old Nia beside her. Another photograph showed Nia at 12, another at 16, another at 18. Graham stared at them. He watched her grow up. Margaret nodded. Your father's investigator did. Did my father know she was my daughter? The records say yes. Graham's eyes filled with rage. Then he found one final folder. It was labeled with a date. June 21st, 24 years earlier. Inside was a typed memo. Graham Hale has not been informed of birth. Mother instructed to leave family permanently. Child to remain unidentified. No contact to be permitted. Graham's hands shook. Then he found a second page. If Graham learns of child, all previous communications should be characterized as fraudulent or unsolicited. He looked at Margaret. Why did you keep this? She looked ashamed. My father told me one day someone would come looking for the truth. Graham closed the folder. He was right. But the worst discovery was still waiting. At the bottom of the box was a photograph of a hospital hallway. In the corner stood Victor Hale's assistant. Beside him was a nurse holding a newborn baby. On the back was written one sentence: "Father not notified." Graham stared at the photograph. This was taken after the birth. Margaret nodded. Yes. Then why does the hospital record say father unknown? Because the record was changed. Graham looked at the date. June 22nd. Who signed the amendment? Margaret handed him another document. Graham read the signature. It wasn't his father's. It was a hospital administrator named Dr. Leonard Price. Graham immediately ordered a complete legal review. Dr. Price had died years earlier, but his son was still alive. When Graham contacted him, the man said something that changed the investigation again. My father regretted what he did. What did he do? He signed the amended record because Victor Hale threatened to expose an illegal payment he had made years earlier. Graham closed his eyes. The web was bigger than he imagined. But finally, every thread led to the same truth. Althea had not abandoned him. Graham had not abandoned her. They had both been manipulated. And Nia had paid the price. Graham returned to Queens. He didn't bring lawyers. He didn't bring cameras. He brought the box. Nia opened the door. What happened? Graham held out the folder. I found proof. She stepped aside. Althea was sitting at the table. Graham placed the documents down one by one. Hospital records. The original birth record. The altered record. The letter Althea had sent. The surveillance photographs. The memo confirming Victor knew about Nia. Althea covered her mouth. Nia stared at the photographs of herself as a child. He knew, she whispered. Graham nodded. My father knew about you. Nia's eyes filled. All those years. Yes. He knew where I lived? Yes. He knew what school I went to? Graham nodded. Nia pushed the photographs away. Why? Graham's voice broke. Because he believed you were a threat to the future he wanted for me. Nia laughed bitterly. I was a child. I know. I didn't even know his name. I know. She looked at Graham. And you? I didn't know you existed. But you believe my mother left you. Yes. Why didn't you fight harder? Graham looked down. Because I was 22. Because I trusted my father. Because I was angry. Because believing she left was easier than believing the person I loved could be taken from me. Nia nodded slowly. That's the first honest answer you've given me. Graham looked at her. I'm sorry. Nia wiped a tear. I don't need you to be sorry every 5 minutes. Then what do you need? She looked at him for a long time. I need you to understand that finding me doesn't erase losing me. Graham nodded. I understand. No, you don't yet. She stood. But maybe you will. That sentence stayed with Graham. He didn't defend himself. He didn't mention the billions he had given to charity. He didn't mention his success. He simply nodded. Then teach me. Nia stared at him. What? Teach me how to be your father. Althea looked away. Nia's eyes filled. I don't know if you can. Neither do I. Graham took a breath. But I'm willing to learn. For the first time, Nia didn't look away. The next step was a DNA test. Nia insisted on it. I believe the records, she said. But I need certainty. Graham agreed immediately. The results came back 7 days later. Probability of paternity, 99.9998%. Graham read the number alone in his office. Then he sat down and cried. Not because the test had confirmed what he already knew. Because for the first time in 24 years, there was a document that could not be manipulated by his father, a lawyer, a hospital administrator, or anyone else. Nia Brooks was his daughter. His daughter. He whispered the words. She's my daughter. He called Althea first. Then Nia. He didn't ask them to come to his office. He went to them. When he arrived, he handed Nia the results. She read them silently. Then she folded the paper. Okay. Graham looked nervous. Okay. Nia nodded. Now we know. Are you angry? Yes. At me? She thought about it. A little. Graham nodded. That's fair. But mostly I'm angry at the years. He understood. The years were the real enemy. Not a single person. Not even Victor. 24 years that nobody could return. Graham publicly disclosed the truth months later. He didn't portray himself as a hero. He didn't call it a family reunion. He said, a powerful family used money and influence to interfere with two people's lives. I benefited from that power even though I did not know the full extent of what happened. I cannot change the past. I can only refuse to hide it now. Reporters asked whether Nia would inherit part of his company. Graham said, that is her decision. They asked whether she had accepted his money. She accepted help with her education, he said. But she is building her own career. They asked whether she called him dad. Graham smiled. Not yet. That answer made headlines. Nia saw the interview and smiled despite herself. Graham never pushed her. He learned to show up without demanding a reward. He attended her graduation. He sat in the back. When she walked across the stage, he stood and applauded until his hands hurt. Althea sat beside him. They didn't hold hands. They didn't need to. After the ceremony, Nia hugged her mother first. Then she looked at Graham. There was a pause. Good job, he said. Nia smiled. Thanks. She started to walk away, then turned back. Graham. Yes. You can come to dinner. His eyes filled. I'd like that. It was not Dad. It wasn't supposed to be. It was better. It was an invitation. Months became a year. Their relationship remained imperfect. Nia sometimes got angry. Graham sometimes said the wrong thing. Althea sometimes needed distance. They learned that reconciliation wasn't a straight line. Some days felt hopeful. Others felt painful. But nobody disappeared. That became their first family rule. No disappearing. If they were angry, they said so. If they needed space, they said so. If something hurt, they talked about it. Graham learned that being a father wasn't about providing money. It was about remembering small things. Nia's favorite coffee. The date of her first day at the nonprofit. The name of her closest friend. The fact that she hated surprise parties. He learned to ask instead of assume. He learned to listen without fixing. He learned that sometimes the best answer was simply, I'm here. Althea slowly began to trust him again, not as the young man she had loved, but as the man standing in front of her now. One evening she said, You changed. Graham smiled. So did you. She shook her head. No. I survived. He looked at her. That's different. Very. She touched her ring. But I'm glad you came. Graham looked at the ring. I'm glad I finally found the door. Almost a year after the night at the Sterling Grand, Nia returned to the same private dining room. She no longer worked there. She had accepted a position with a nonprofit that provided scholarships and technology training to students from underserved communities. Graham had offered her a job at Hale Systems. She declined. I don't want to become successful because I'm your daughter, she told him. I want to become successful because I'm me. Graham smiled. That's exactly what I want. Now he stood by the window waiting for her. Althea was beside him. 2 velvet boxes sat on the table. Nia looked at them. What's this? Graham opened one. His ring was inside. Althea opened the second. Her ring rested beside it. Nia looked between them. Why are they here? Graham said. Because for 24 years I thought these rings represented a promise that was broken. Althea shook her head. The promise wasn't broken. The people were separated. Nia smiled sadly. Graham placed his ring beside Althea's. Maybe we make a new promise. What promise? Nia asked. Graham looked at both women. No secrets. Althea nodded. No disappearing. Nia added. No using money to speak for people who aren't in the room. Graham laughed. That one may be difficult. Nia raised an eyebrow. Then practice. I will. Althea looked at the rings. And one more. They turned toward her. No more believing that silence is the same thing as peace. Nobody spoke. Then Nia reached across the table and placed her hand over her mother's. Graham put his hand beside theirs. Not over them. Beside them. It was a small gesture, but Althea noticed. He wasn't trying to control the moment. He was simply present. Later that night, the three stood beside the window overlooking Manhattan. Graham held the ring in his palm. You know what still bothers me? Nia looked at him. What? For 24 years. I thought the ring meant I had lost someone. He looked at Althea. Now I think it means I had something worth finding. Althea smiled. Maybe. Nia touched the gold band. Mom kept it because she remembered what it meant. Althea shook her head. I kept it because I refused to let someone else decide that my love had been meaningless. Graham lowered his eyes. The ring had never been proof of ownership. It had never been proof of wealth. It had never been proof that Althea belonged to him. It was proof that something real had existed. Something powerful enough to survive fear, manipulation, distance, and 24 years of silence. The next morning, Nia returned to the Sterling Grand to collect the last box from her old locker. Her former manager met her near the service elevator. People still talk about that dinner, he said. Nia smiled. I wish they would talk about something else. Why? Because I wasn't important because I recognized a billionaire's ring. She picked up her bag. I was important before anyone in that room knew my name. The manager nodded. Nia walked toward the elevator. Behind her, the hotel continued exactly as it always had. Crystal glasses, polished floors, expensive dinners, people discussing millions of dollars while staff moved quietly around them. But Nia was different. Not because she had discovered a billionaire father. Not because she had access to wealth. Not because she could now walk into rooms where she once served drinks. She was different because she understood something her mother had known all along. Dignity does not begin when powerful people notice you. It begins when you refuse to let their failure to notice you define your worth. Graham Hale had once believed power meant controlling the room. Nia taught him that real power could mean something completely different. It could mean listening when the person speaking had nothing to offer except the truth. It could mean admitting that your family had done something wrong. It could mean refusing to use money to erase consequences. It could mean showing up without expecting forgiveness. And sometimes it could mean sitting quietly at a small kitchen table while the woman you once loved decided whether she could trust you again. Nia never forgot the night beneath the chandelier. She never forgot the rain against the windows. She never forgot the diamond flashing beneath the amber light. Most of all, she never forgot the silence after she spoke. She had entered that room carrying plates. She had walked out carrying the truth. The billionaire CEO had entered believing he controlled everything. He walked out knowing there was one thing no amount of money could control: the past. He could buy a company. He could buy a building. He could move billions of dollars with a signature. But he couldn't buy back Nia's childhood. He couldn't return Althea's lost years. He couldn't erase the empty chair at birthdays or the questions Nia had swallowed as a child. What he could do was show up now. He could tell the truth now. He could listen now. He could choose humility now. And perhaps that was what redemption really meant. Not getting the past back. Not pretending the damage never happened. Not buying forgiveness. Redemption meant becoming worthy of the future you still had. Years later, Nia would still remember that first sentence. Sir, my mother has a ring exactly like yours. It had sounded small, almost insignificant. But sometimes a small truth can break open a very large lie. Sometimes the person everyone overlooks is the only person in the room who can see what everyone else has been trained not to notice. Sometimes the truth waits 24 years for the right voice. And sometimes the voice belongs to a waitress carrying a tray through a room full of billionaires. The ring had waited. Althea had waited. Graham had waited without knowing what he was waiting for. And Nia had spent her childhood waiting for an answer to a question nobody wanted to answer. That night, beneath the chandelier, all of them finally found it. Not all at once. Not perfectly. Not without pain. But they found it. Because truth doesn't always arrive like a dramatic announcement. Sometimes it arrives as a familiar face. A matching ring. A forgotten letter. A hospital record. A photograph. A question that makes powerful people uncomfortable. And when the truth finally has nowhere left to hide, it doesn't need money. It doesn't need revenge. It simply needs someone brave enough to say it aloud. Graham never forgot what Nia taught him. The person with the most power in a room isn't necessarily the one with the most money. It may be the person willing to tell the truth when everyone else is afraid of the consequences. Nia never wanted to be a billionaire's daughter. She wanted to know why her father was gone. She wanted to know why her mother had spent years staring at a ring. She wanted an answer. What she found was bigger than an answer. She found a family story that had been stolen from her. And instead of allowing the discovery to define her, she chose to define what came next. She didn't become Graham Hale's employee. She didn't move into his mansion. She didn't change her name. She didn't let money become the center of her identity. She built her own life. Graham respected that. Althea protected it. And together, slowly, they created something that could not be purchased. Trust. Not perfect trust. Not instant trust. Real trust. The kind built one ordinary moment at a time. One dinner. One phone call. One birthday. One apology. One promise kept. One visit without a gift. One conversation that ended without anyone walking away. That was the true meaning of the two rings. They were not symbols of ownership. They were not symbols of wealth. They were reminders that love can be manipulated, but it cannot always be erased. They were reminders that silence can last for decades, but truth can still survive. And they were reminders that people can lose years without losing the possibility of tomorrow. On a cold winter evening, Nia sat beside her mother in the same Queen's apartment where she had grown up. The radiator rattled. Rain tapped against the window. Althea was wearing the ring. Nia smiled. "You still wear it?" Althea looked down. "Yes." "Why?" Her mother thought for a moment. "Because I like it." Nia laughed. "That's all. That's enough." Althea took the ring off and placed it in Nia's hand. "Keep it someday." Nia stared at it. "Why?" "Because it belongs to our story." Nia closed her fingers around the gold. "It doesn't belong to him." Althea smiled. "No." She touched her daughter's hand. "It belongs to the truth." Nia looked at the ring. Then she understood something she had never understood as a child. Her mother had not kept that ring because she was trapped in the past. She had kept it because the past was part of who she was, and nobody had the right to erase that. The ring was not a chain. It was a witness. A tiny piece of gold that had survived everything powerful people had tried to bury. And perhaps that was why the story mattered. Not because a waitress discovered she was related to a billionaire. Not because a CEO found a lost daughter. Not because a family secret finally became public. It mattered because a young woman who had been taught to stay invisible chose, for one brief moment, to speak. She could have walked away. She could have stayed silent. She could have protected her job and forgotten the strange coincidence. Instead, she trusted what she saw. She trusted her memory. She trusted her mother. And she trusted herself. That single act of courage opened a door. Behind that door were 24 years of pain. But there was also the possibility of something new. A relationship that didn't exist before. A father learning how to be a father. A mother finally being believed. A daughter finally receiving an answer. None of it erased the past. But it changed the meaning of the future. The billionaire CEO who once believed money could solve almost anything learned the hardest lesson of his life. Wealth can create opportunity, but it cannot create time. Power can open doors, but it cannot force someone to trust you. Money can provide comfort, but it cannot replace presence. And a perfect apology means nothing if it is not followed by imperfect, consistent action. Graham spent the rest of his life trying to live that lesson. Not because the world was watching. Not because reporters were interested. Not because Nia owed him anything. He did it because he finally understood what he had lost. And what he still had. A daughter who had given him another chance without promising him forgiveness. A woman who had survived 24 years without him. And a future that, although it could never replace the past, could still be meaningful. The ring remained a symbol of that future. Two small circles of gold beneath Manhattan lights. One belonged to a woman who had waited. One belonged to a man who had searched too late. And between them stood a daughter who had unknowingly carried the missing piece of their story her entire life. Nia Brooks had walked into the Sterling Grand carrying a tray. She had walked out carrying the truth. And the man who once believed power meant making everyone listen finally learned that real power begins with the humility to listen. Sometimes redemption is not getting the past back. Sometimes redemption is showing up for the future. Sometimes healing is not forgetting the years that were stolen. It is refusing to let those years steal the years that remain. And sometimes a tiny engraved star hidden beneath a diamond can carry a secret for 24 years, waiting for one person brave enough to notice. The night the waitress spoke, the room stopped. The executives stopped talking. The glasses stopped moving. Graham Hale stopped pretending his past was buried. And Nia stopped being invisible. She didn't demand attention. She didn't ask for money. She didn't know she was standing in front of her father. She simply told the truth. "Sir, my mother has a ring exactly like yours." And that sentence changed 3 lives forever. Because sometimes the truth doesn't need to shout. Sometimes it only needs to be spoken once. And when it is, even the richest man in the room has no choice but to listen.